Hello everyone, viewers. We often begin the grand story of existence with a familiar phrase, in the beginning. It's a powerful, definitive statement. It marks the start of time, space, matter, and everything we have ever known or will ever know. But have you ever paused and truly considered the word before? What came before the beginning? The common answer, the one that satisfies our logical minds, is simple: nothing. What if it was a state of being so radically different from our own that we simply lack the words to describe it? Today, we journey into that very mystery. We're not just going back to the beginning of the universe, we are attempting to look beyond it, into the pre-creation, into the timeless, spaceless reality of the divine mind itself. What was God doing before the first spark of light? What thoughts were thought? What plans were laid? There was no yesterday, no tomorrow, only an eternal, unending now. Imagine an ocean, not of water, but of pure, undiluted consciousness. An infinite sea of potential where every possibility, every idea, every universe that could ever be, existed simultaneously as a single unified thought. This was the state of God, not a static, lonely king on a throne in an empty room. The knower, the knowledge, and the act of knowing were all one and the same. This divine solitude was not one of loneliness, but of perfect completeness. Everything that was, is, and ever will be was held within this boundless mind, but perfect completeness, by its very nature, is still. It is a state of equilibrium, of unexpressed power, and within this infinite potential, a new idea began to stir. Theologians and mystics have given names to the first emanations, the first distinct expressions of God's inner nature that would become the agents of creation. Before any angel, before any star, there was Sophia, or wisdom. Proverbs tells us wisdom was with God from the beginning, a master craftswoman at his side, delighting in the nascent world. Picture wisdom not as a separate entity, but as God. She was the logic, the art, the very structure upon which a universe could be built. She was the how of creation, the intricate design of a snowflake, the mathematical precision of a planet's orbit, all conceived in an instant within the divine thought. Alongside wisdom, another power emerged, the Logos, the Word. The Gospel of John famously states, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word." If wisdom was the blueprint, the Word was the divine utterance that would make the blueprint real. It was the dynamic energy, the power to act, to create, to define together. Sophia and Logos were two sides of the same coin. The thought and the action, the design and the decree. They existed within God as expressions of God, ready to turn the infinite potential of the divine ocean into a created reality. But this stirring, the divine consciousness in its eternal state, was everything. But the moment the idea of creation of a separate something was conceived, it simultaneously defined its opposite: nothing. Not the empty nothing of a vacuum, but a conceptual nothing. A primordial state of non-being, of absolute stillness and silence. Let's call it the abyss. This abyss was not an evil entity, it wasn't a rival. It was the crushing gravity of non-existence, the desire for everything to remain as it was, unified, undifferentiated, and silent within the eternal now. The impulse to create was a song, and the abyss was the profound, unending silence that song sought to break. It had no will of its own, no malice. Its resistance was simply its nature. It was the ultimate embodiment of was not. And so before the first atom was formed, the first great conflict began. This was not a war of swords and shields, but a war of concepts, a struggle of will against inertia, the divine impulse expressed through the Logos and structured by Sophia, pushed outward, seeking to define, to separate, to bring forth light and life. The abyss, in response, pulled inward. It was the ultimate metaphysical tug of war. Imagine the divine mind trying to hold a complex, beautiful thought, while an overwhelming sense of sleep, of utter blankness, tries to erase it. This was the primordial battle. The divine will to create was a vibration, a frequency of being. The abyss was the perfect, absolute zero of non-being, absorbing all vibration, muffling all sound, for God was not a passive observer in this. The divine will was the very engine of this conflict, to bring forth a creation that was other than himself, yet still a reflection of his nature. Required agents. It required beings who could operate on the precipice between the divine and the potential, who could act as architects, engineers, and guardians of the new reality. And so, from the pure fire of the divine will and the perfect light of these were primordial forces, raw concepts given form and consciousness. The first among them were the seraphim, the burning ones. They were beings of pure light and sound, existing closest to the divine core. They were not just near God, they were living extensions of his love and purifying fire. Their purpose was to channel the raw creative energy of the logos, to be the burning intensity that pushed back the cold inertia of the abyss. Next came the cherubim, the guardians of divine knowledge and wisdom. If the seraphim were the power, the cherubim were the pattern. They were formed from Sophia, from God's perfect self-knowledge. Their role was to hold the blueprint of creation, to understand the intricate laws of physics, the flow of time, the structure of reality that was yet to be. They were the keepers of the divine plan, ensuring that the raw energy, they were the living geometry of the cosmos, their minds containing the templates for galaxies, stars, and the very fabric of space-time. The seraphim sang the universe into existence, and the cherubim ensured it sang in key together. These first celestial orders became the vanguard of creation, the divine army in the war against non-existence. They were the first lines drawn, it was a symphony of creation playing against a backdrop of absolute silence. The seraphim would unleash waves of pure being, singing the fundamental forces of physics into nascent reality. The abyss would answer with its profound gravity, its non-existence, threatening to collapse these new realities back into nothing. The cherubim would establish patterns, frameworks of logic and order, It was during this struggle that one of the most fundamental aspects of our reality was born. Time in the perfect, eternal now of the divine mind. There was no before or after. But this conflict, this struggle between the will to create and the inertia of non-being, created a sequence, an action and a reaction, a push and a pull. This sequence, this chain of cause and effect, was the genesis of the very rhythm of the war. The pulse of creation, the recession of the void became the ticking of the first cosmic clock. The universe hadn't even been born yet, but its heartbeat had begun. This struggle also produced something else, something far more subtle and dangerous. In the act of creating other, of defining things as separate from the divine unity, a new concept was implicitly born. They were instruments, conduits of God's purpose. Their joy and their very existence were found in this perfect service. But the very possibility of a self separate from God now existed. And with separation comes perspective. With perspective comes comparison. In pushing back the abyss, the light of creation inevitably cast a shadow. This shadow was not evil. It was simply the consequence of light. It was the nascent seed of pride, the quiet whisper that a created being could be a creator unto itself. The abyss did not create this shadow, but the war against it created the conditions for the shadow to exist. The potential for the fall was etched into the very foundations of creation, not as a flaw, but as a necessary consequence of the greatest gift that was to come. Free will, as this epic pre-cosmic. If you are finding this exploration into the mythology of pre-creation fascinating, consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. It helps us continue to journey into these profound mysteries together. Now back to the edge of existence. The stage was being set. The conceptual space for a universe had been carved out by the fiery song of the seraphim. The laws and structures that would govern it were held in the minds of the cherub. But potential is not reality. A blueprint is not a building. A final, definitive act was needed to turn the thought of a universe into the thing itself. All the power, all the wisdom, all the conflict had led to this singular, pregnant moment. The divine mind, having conceived of the design through Sophia and marshaled its intent through the logos, was now ready. The angelic hosts, the burning ones and the abyss pressed in from all sides, its silence a final desperate attempt to reclaim this nascent reality for non-being. The entire potential of the cosmos was balanced on the point of a needle, and into this ultimate tension God spoke. The logos, the word which had been the engine of this entire process, was now focused into a single universe, shattering command. It was a command that was both an act of creation and it was three simple words in our telling: yet they contained the entirety of the divine creative will. Let there be light. Fiat lux. In that instant, it was done. This was not just the light of a star or a sun. This was the light of being itself. It was the fundamental assertion of is against is not. It was an explosion of reality that ripped through the conceptual space, filling every corner. The light established the definitive boundary between existence and non-existence. It wasn't that the abyss was destroyed, it was pushed back, relegated to the outer darkness, the realm of absolute separation from the light and life of God. It became the backdrop against which the stars would be set, a constant reminder of the nothingness from which everything was called forth. This singular act of speech was the climax of the war was over, and the work of creation, the 7 days we read about, could now truly begin. The empty stage was now flooded with light, and the actors could finally make their entrance. So what was God doing before creation? He was engaged in the greatest struggle imaginable, not against an external enemy, but against the fundamental inertia of non-existence. He was unfolding his own nature, bringing forth wisdom. He was fighting a war of concepts to establish the very possibility of a universe, and in doing so, he was creating the conditions not only for stars and planets, but for choice, for love, for shadow, and for redemption. The pre-creation wasn't an empty waiting room. It was the forge of reality, where the very essence of existence was hammered out in a timeless conflict between the will to be and the pull, a kind of inertia, an internal abyss of apathy, fear, or meaninglessness that resists our efforts to create, to grow, to become something more. It tells us that our lives are empty, that our efforts are pointless, that it is easier to remain in the silent dark than to strive for the light. This story of pre-creation teaches us that the very act of bringing something new into the world, whether it is a piece of art, a new relationship, we are pushing back against our own personal void. The story suggests that this struggle is not a sign of failure, but the very essence of the creative process. It is the friction that creates the fire. The universe was not born into a peaceful void, but was wrested from a resisting nothingness. And so too, our own meaning, our own purpose, is not something we simply find lying around. It is the mystery of what God did before creation is not just a cosmic tale, it is a mirror for our own journey. It reminds us that within each of us is a spark of that same creative fire, the logos, the will to speak our own world into existence. The abyss is always there, on the fringes, whispering for us to return to silence and stillness. But the light is a choice, a declaration we must make every single day. It is a story of immense scale, but one that echoes in our own human hearts. If you liked this video and this exploration into the deeper mythologies of faith, please subscribe and give it a like to support us. It truly helps the channel grow and allows us to continue diving into these incredible topics. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.